Joanna Pineda. I'm CEO and Chief Troublemaker here at Matrix Group. And Wes, would you like to say hello?
Hi, this is Wes Trochlil with Effective Database Management.
Hopefully everyone can see the slides and the live video of Wes. There's no video of me because today is the Wes show. He is the business intelligence guy. He's the expert, and so I'll be asking him some questions and following along with the slides. So thanks so much for joining us this morning. We're going to be talking about business intelligence. You know, we decided to do this webinar because we have so many clients who say, I've got all this data, but I don't know what to do with it. Or I'm collecting all this data. I've got 25 years of membership data. I've got 25 years of meeting registration data. What do I do with it? How do I get it out of my AMS? Or I've got data all over the place. So today we'll talk about business intelligence and what you can do with your AMS to get some of that trend information out of the system. A couple of housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, so in the next day or two we'll send you a link to the recording, the slides, and a survey link. Please do let us know how we're doing. The phones are going to be muted, but if you've got questions, we'll welcome them during the webinar and afterwards. So go back to your WebEx control panel and send a question to Matrix Group 1. And I've got someone monitoring the WebEx, and she'll let us know that we've got a question. And then finally, after today's webinar, hopefully we'll pique your interest and you'll want to know more. You'll want to continue the discussion. So post them to our Facebook page or tweet us, and at the end of the slides, we've actually got Twitter information for both Wes and myself. So this webinar is brought to you by Matrix Maxx, which is Matrix Group's association management software. It's used by dozens of trade associations and professional societies. And here are the different modules that are available. It's got all the features that you would expect related to contact management, membership management, meetings, trade show, advocacy, list management, etc. Please let us know if you are in the market for a new AMS, if you are interested in learning more, or if you'd like a demo. So Wes, let's get started. You are passionate about business intelligence. You talk about this, you blog about it. How do you define it?
My definition of business intelligence is that BI is a management process for using data to make decisions. So there's three elements to that. It's a process, which means this is not an event, it's not a one-time thing, it's something we're going to do over time. We're using data, that's the key here. This isn't shooting from the gut or just talking about things that happened last week. We're using data that from whether it's the past year, the past 3 years, the past 5 years, but we're using actual data that we've collected from a variety of sources. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, using that data to make decisions. So my advice I always give to my clients or associations considering doing BI is if you're not willing to actually use that data to make decisions, some of which may be difficult to make, which may go contrary to conventional wisdom, for example, then don't bother. If you're not willing to make those decisions, the rest of this is kind of a moot process.
So, Wes, you've got some great case studies to share with us of organizations that did, kind of take the lead. They decided to look at their data in a different way and then make some decisions. So let's get started. So the first case study is an organization called Grant Makers for Effective Organizations. Tell us about what they did.
Sure. Grant Makers for Effective Organizations, or GEO, their membership is organizationally based. They have, I think, somewhere between 400 and 500 organizational members. And about 3 years ago, they decided that they wanted to understand how their members were engaging with the organization, with the association, with GEO specifically. And so what they did was looked at all the individuals associated with all those member organizations, and they measured different engagement points. In GEO's case, they actually identified 36 different points of engagement that they could measure against the individuals associated with these organizations. And they put a score against those. They weighted those, meaning that for different engagement events, they gave them different weights. So if you served on the board of directors, for example, I think that was worth 10 points. If you opened up a web page on their website, that was worth 1 point, and then you had things in between. And so they scored that against all their 400 members and were able to categorize based on those scores. And the third bullet point here is the observation that they made was that the top 30% of their members had a renewal rate of almost 100%. I think in those 3 years they'd lost one member out of that top 30%. And the flip side, of course, was those who had the scores in the bottom 30%. Those were the groups that were most likely to drop.
And Wes, this shouldn't have surprised them, right?
Well, yeah, I think what they learned is that those that were more highly engaged, of course, were more likely to renew. And I think on the next slide there, we talk about one of their most important learning points was that if someone in the organization was engaged at a volunteer level, that increased the likelihood of their renewing membership dramatically. And so what they decided, of course, was that looking at that bottom 30%, how could they involve them in more volunteer engagements? And so they've developed some programs where they're going to go out and talk to these groups about how they can become more engaged, whether it's straight committee work, the traditional kind of volunteer work, speaking at GEO events, writing for GEO publications, and there are even some other volunteer opportunities as well.
Wes, I find this fascinating because even though this is a company-based membership, it's effectively a trade association, it's the volunteer activities of individuals that really drove organization renewals.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, in hindsight, it kind of makes sense because if individuals at the organizations are seeing some direct benefit and being directly involved, then obviously if there's any issue with renewing membership, you kind of work through those people and say, look, Wes has been very actively engaged. I think if you talk to Wes about the benefit he's getting from GEO, you'll probably want to renew your membership. And that's exactly what they found.
Neat. So now you've got another example. This is NACUBO. Tell us about this. And first tell us who NACUBO is.
Sure. NACUBO is the National Association of College and University Business Officers. So it's the four-year schools in the U.S. primarily at the business office level, not the academics, but the men and women who run the physical plant, so to speak. And what NACUBO does is education, like a lot of associations do, and they do somewhere between 25 and 35 in-person events a year. They've added a whole bunch of webinars. And a couple of years ago, they got a new director of marketing, Steve Duran, who had a background in direct mail marketing. And when he looked at how they were doing their physical direct mail promotions, he said, we're spending way too much money sending a lot of direct mail to people who, frankly, aren't going to respond. And he said, I think I can actually reduce the cost of the direct mail program without negatively affecting attendance. And so what he did was he took 3 years of data from multiple data sources within NACUBO. NACUBO has a primary association management software system, but they have 3 or 4 other major sources of data that, again, show engagement at the association level. So we're talking about things like event attendance, products purchases, product downloads from the website, participation in surveys and other programs that NACUBO does, industry surveys, so to speak. And he measured all that, again, gave it different weighting based on the kind of engagement they were involved in, and identified his best and worst customers. And what he said was, I know from my direct mail background that when you promote to your best customers, you'll do better than promoting to everybody. And that's what he said was, I will promote more to that top quarter and less to the bottom. In his case, I think it was bottom half that he really lowered the number of physical direct mail that was sent to them. And the result was not only a reduction in cost of 30%, as it says there, but he actually increased revenue by 40%.
So Wes, effectively, he was able to get more participation from people who were already pretty active, but maybe not all of them were attending as regularly.
Right, and the thing to keep in mind, again, just like GEO, in NACUBO's case, they're a trade-based organization. The membership is at the organizational level, but he's talking to the individuals within those organizations. And so he was able to, by increasing the amount of physical mail sent to that better buying group, he was able to attract even more attendance, more engagement from those groups.
So Wes, what was the initial reaction by senior leadership when Steve said, I'm not going to mail to everyone? Because I tell you, we've got lots of clients that say, wow, we've got to increase attendance by 20%. So over the next month, we're going to send 4 mailings to everyone in our database.
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. And the reality is that when he first went, actually back at NACUBO at that time, the program managers, so the staff putting on the event itself, excuse me, were the ones who were responsible for actually doing the promotion. And so when he went to them and said, we're going to change how we do promotion, of course their response was, you can't change it because this is working. We've got the number of attendees we're supposed to have. And his philosophy was, we can do just as well and not spend as much money so we can actually cut costs. And their reaction was, don't. They didn't want him to do it. He was able to convince them with the data that he had that chances were good that this would not negatively impact attendance. And in fact, of course, the results show that it actually increased attendance while decreasing costs. And so he was able to convert some believers of the old style of promoting, move them to a new way of doing this.
Wow, pretty amazing stuff. So, I think what we want to do next is really talk about how can BI help you with specific goals, like increasing membership renewals or increasing meeting registrations. But how does BI help you spot important trends?
Well, I think the key there is trends implies that you have data over time, and that's what's really important, is that you've got data not just, like I said earlier, not just from last week or from your gut, that you've got actual information from your central association management software system.
So, and I want to show you a couple of examples from the Matrix Maxx system, but certainly all of you, no matter what system you're using, whether it's IMAS, Vectra, Euclid, whatever it is, you've got this. So here we've got something called the annual membership report, which shows you, for every single member, a 5-year dues history. And I find this report just so incredibly fascinating because, and you can't see it because this is just a screenshot, but what this allows you to do is actually sort the list by the header. So you can say, who are my top members in 09, 10, 11, 12, and current. And what you probably find is that sometimes there's a lot of stability. It's 1, 2, 3. But sometimes there's a lot of deltas, and so that's just very interesting. And often, if you look at this too, you can even export this to Excel, chart the data, and see, is everything going up at the same time, everything going down at the same time, or were there some big mergers that happened? So this is an example of a report that we tell our clients to look at a lot. Here's another report that I absolutely love. I call this the Who's Not Doing What report. And what this allows you to do is to run a search to say, give me all of the members who say, in this example, are only dues paying. So if you take a look, the criteria selected was no participation on committees, no logins on the website, no meeting registration, no commerce orders, and no bills. So basically they're dues paying. They're mailboxers, I think you call them, Wes.
Right.
And so these are 22 organizations. Some organizations, what we find is they're so focused on the folks who are doing things with them that they don't focus as much on the organizations that are not doing stuff with them. So what we say is, pay attention to these folks, because when that dues renewal notice comes out, they'll say, what do we do with these guys? Nothing? Did we miss them? Well, depending on your dues, if it's $400, maybe they'll pay it. But if it's $10,000, $75,000, it might be a different conversation. And so then you and I, Wes, would say, devote your life to getting some level of participation from these 22 companies.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And as we introduced that segment there, the key is having that data available and easily accessible. And so I think obviously knowing who your at-risk members are is really critical as you develop new marketing or communication plans.
But Wes, what I find so interesting about BI is when we, I'll be honest, when we're showing these business intelligence reports to some of our clients and prospects, they think that they're really interesting, but I think sometimes the reaction we get is like the NACUBO reaction, we're good. If we're talking to meetings people, they'll say, well, my job is to put the meeting on.
Right.
And it's, marketing's job to get the people there, and we've had good numbers. So it's almost like the data doesn't matter. So Wes, who typically does care, and who do you think should care?
Well, obviously I love the data, and the thing I like about data is that, again, you're not working from your gut, it's empirical. And so you can make arguments, make case about why we should do a certain thing, again, based on the evidence, not based on what we feel at that moment, not based on the loudest board member from the last board meeting, but to actually say, look, we have data that shows these people participate, these people don't, these people are engaged, and these people aren't, or whatever it is. And we use that data, again, empirically to adjust our behavior. And so who should care, of course, is everybody, but what's critical is that the senior leadership has buy-in. I think what's most important is that you've got either an executive director in smaller organizations or senior staff if it's a large organization who believe in looking at the data, analyzing the data, and adjusting and adapting their behavior based on what they learn. And we'll talk a little later about why associations don't do this, but that's the key, is you got to have the willingness, and I mentioned that in the definition of business intelligence. When we talk about making decisions, you have to have a willingness to change how you do certain things, and the NACUBO example being a great one.
You know, and I think this speaks to senior leadership should care, and they need to kind of be open to the idea that sometimes you're going to be wrong.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. I think that's just a willingness to take risks in general, I think, is going to lead to greater success in anything we do. And so part of business intelligence is a willingness to take risks on what the data is telling us, and that that can feel very uncomfortable, especially if it contravenes conventional wisdom.
So what are your top tips for creating a data-driven organization? Because it sounds like what you're really talking about is policy changes and culture changes. Where
Right.
if in the past they really were relying on gut, now you're saying, no, gut is important and experience is important, but data needs to be important.
Yeah. And I think, you've got the classic Venn diagram of people, process, and technology. It's the intersection of those three that's really important. So part of that, notice on the slide here, is that you've got to identify the data that's most useful to you. In GEO's case, they actually identified 36 different points where they felt that measured engagement. In the NACUBO's case, they identified, I think, about probably 22 different points that they measured. And so you have to identify which data points are most useful to you when you go through this process. And as I note here, you have to stop collecting data that you're not using. Too often I work with associations as we work through this process, and we talk about the different data points they're collecting, and I always ask the question, if it doesn't seem obvious to me, what is that data used for? And very often, not always, but very often the association will respond, well, we thought this was interesting. Yeah, but what do we do once we learn this information? Well, we don't do anything with it. Okay, then let's stop collecting that. That's wasted effort.
Wasting a field in the database.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone's collecting it and entering it. Let's not use it. Well, maybe they could use it in the future, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the excuse, and frankly, most of the time that's the rationalization. Well, we're not using it now, but we might in the future. And my response usually is, well, if that's true, then we've got to talk about what that really looks like, and if it's data that's timely, then future use of that data is not going to be useful because the data will be old.
Right. So, Wes, you talk a lot about having a master database, storing everything in the one database. Why is that so important?
Well, the key, of course, especially if we're analyzing data over time, is you've got to have it all in one place so you can analyze it and make comparisons and see the trends and so on. Association management systems like MatrixMaxx and others can really help us get there. The key is that very often associations will be managing data outside of their AMS, which is fine. You might have a third-party registration system, for example, that it makes sense for what you're trying to do. But the key is identifying that data is useful and bringing it back into the primary database. So in the case, using MatrixMaxx as an example, I might have a third-party company doing my annual conference registration, but those are my members for the most part that are attending that meeting. I should be able to bring that attendance information back from the third-party system into MatrixMaxx, and then I can continue to analyze that data.
And let me put this together, because if I don't have the data all in one place, then I can't do the interesting analysis that you're saying is important. I can't say, give me all the members who, A, attended the annual conference, have at least some type of committee involvement, purchase the publication. Because if it's in all these different sources, then you're either doing a whole lot of joins with your database queries, or worse, you can't even do comparisons because you don't have a member ID field. So then you're stuck.
Yeah, and so I would say can't isn't the right word because I've seen it done. But what happens is literally you'll spend a month doing it instead of analyzing it in 10 minutes.
Yep.
And frankly, that's one of the reasons associations don't do it. Is because they have very dispersed sets of data, and they haven't been able to figure out a way to get it all together, and therefore they look at it and go, God, this is going to take forever, and it's not going to give us great returns on our time.
Right. So why? I mean, I think you're always talking about this at every tech conference. You're doing something on BI, and you're saying, look, the returns can be really great. But organizations are just reluctant to do it. And you say it's because of fear.
Right. Yeah, I wrote an article about this on my website, effectivedatabase.com. You can find it, but that gets into the details here. But there were 4 fear factors, I guess you could call them. The first is the fear of not doing it right, the idea that I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with business intelligence, and therefore I'm not going to. And I think that's understandable, but we need to get past that. The fear of actually doing something and then getting it wrong, and as a result, getting in trouble for that for some reason. That gets back to the point we were already making, where we've got to have a willingness to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. The third one is a big one, the fear of contradicting conventional wisdom. Every association has a culture and a set of beliefs, including beliefs on what programs are best, what programs perform better than others, which are most important, and so on. And sometimes business intelligence actual analysis of data shows it's simply not true. What we've always believed to be our best program isn't. I have a great example from personal experience where an association I was working in as a director of membership, for years and years and years, the events department was the golden child because they brought in so much revenue. It was probably close to half of the association's revenue came from the events department. But what wasn't being calculated was the cost involved for actually creating, delivering, and managing those events. And when the costs were measured against the revenue, we in fact were losing money on our events. So the old joke of every sale is a loser, but we make it up in volume was exactly the truth there. And so the conventional wisdom was events was great. The reality with the data was that events actually was not performing very well, and we had to change how we did things. And that was very, very uncomfortable in that association.
So if you're the executive director or the president and somebody says, I want to do this, and they've got the data to back it, I mean, I think you're saying give it a chance, but also know that you're not going to get everything right, because any time you change, you're going to get some things wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I give the same advice when my clients go through a database conversion, when they switch from something else and move into Matrix Maxx, for example. I tell them right up front, one thing we have to acknowledge is that we will make decisions now that are wrong. We're trying to make decisions the best, with the information that we have at this moment. And later on, as we start using the system, we might find, it makes more sense to set this event up a different way, or managing the data this way doesn't work for us the way we thought it would. And that's okay. We have to acknowledge that we will make incorrect decisions, but that we have the ability to modify those decisions downstream. And the same is true for business intelligence. We have to acknowledge that sometimes we'll analyze stuff and it turns out that's not correct, but that shouldn't be a reason to stop us from doing it at all.
Right. So, I get this question, you get this question, how do you get the conversation started with your AMS company? And I'll chime in here and then please do add. I know that my team says, tell us what your goals are, because when you tell us what your goals are and you tell us what you want to know, we'll let you know what's available. We'll maybe show you how to use the reports and the queries in new and interesting ways, and we'll share with you what we've known other organizations to have done that has worked well. So I think the advice that I would say here, as someone who works a lot with organizations, is, the more we know, the more helpful we can become. And it's often not even a question of money, because every AMS, whether it's MatrixMaxx or IMIS or NetForum or APTIAN or Go members, they've got a lot of the stuff already there.
Right. Yeah, and so I think, you raise a really good point, and something, Joanna, you and I have talked about a lot in the past, is that if you're using an off-the-shelf system especially, you have to have a really strong partnership with your vendor so that you can have these kind of conversations. And your last bullet point is a really important one, which is asking the vendor, what are your other clients doing? What are other associations doing? What are they measuring? What are they looking at? And that might give you, that doesn't mean you should do that, but it might give you a place to start the conversation.
Right. So we get this question a lot. How much does it cost and what's the timeline? And I'll just chime in here, and Wes, you can continue. Again, because in addition to having our own AMS, we work with lots and lots of other databases. What we find is you probably already have most of the reports that you need, or every AMS is going to be equipped with some type of search or query builder that lets you run this data. Now, within MatrixMaxx, we've got a suite of these reports, and they run about $750 each, so they're just not that expensive. But really, any system is going to have some built-in stuff. But Wes, your point is creating the reports is easy.
Right.
It's really changing your process and integrating this data into your process that takes time because it's a culture shift.
Yeah, the discussion we had about fear, I think that's the critical one there, that once you learn things from this data, that may be uncomfortable. You may learn things that you didn't want to hear or didn't expect to see, and you have to have a willingness to accept that may be the new reality, and you need to adjust your processes and policies appropriately. And I think your last bullet point's a good one, which is, the technology and creating the reports is the easy part. The hard part is integrating this process into your overall company culture.
Wes, do you find that when an organization has had success with BI, that it's transformative, that they become addicted to it? Because I've seen that. They're like, wow, can we do more with this? What do you find?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's, in one sense, it's almost a catch-22 because you can become obsessed with it, and so you have to balance wanting to get all this information and the ability to get all this information with actually using that information and executing to advance your organization's mission. And so I think you're right. And then it's just a matter, it's like anything else you discover that's great fun. Ooh, that chocolate cake is good. I'll have 4 slices a day. If you go too crazy, you'll overdose, and that won't be good either.
So for those listening to the webinar today who say, okay, how do I even get started with this? Because I'm not doing any of it now. What should they be doing? These are some of your tips.
Yeah, I think, first you have to ask yourself what you're trying to accomplish. Everything in life starts with objectives. What are we trying to do? And so we don't want to start business intelligence for the sake of. There's a reason. We're trying to accomplish something. And so once you identify what that is, whether it's improving membership or improving attendance or improving product sales or increased engagement, then you need to ask yourself, what data do you need that will help you reach those goals, that will help you make decisions that will help you reach these goals? As we talked about already, if you're using an off-the-shelf system, you definitely should talk to your vendor about this. Starting with one initiative makes a lot of sense. The old joke is, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. So how do you start business intelligence? You do it one step at a time. To identify one thing you want to be able to do. And if you have the ability, someone internally has to be the data guru. Someone has to be paying attention to this. For small organizations, it can be the executive director. For larger organizations, it might be a director of marketing, a director of membership. I would say that I get this question a lot, is this something that should be an IT's department? And my answer is they should be supporting it like they should be supporting a lot of things. But IT probably shouldn't lead this initiative because typically they don't have the 360-degree view on the organization or its objectives. So I'm speaking generally here. There are certain exceptions to that. But usually it needs to come from one of the functional areas. And then ultimately, business intelligence is everyone's job. There has to be a culture of that within your organization for it to be really successful.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask Sarah here if we've got any questions. So for those of you who have questions, please jump back onto the WebEx Control Center. But if you find after this webinar that you've got questions, we're on Twitter and we're on Facebook. If you like this webinar, we've got another webinar coming up called 5 Things You Need to Ask Your AMS Vendor. Put them on the spot. Make sure they're working for you. And then finally, you'll be getting this when we send you the slides. Here is contact information for Matrix Group, and perhaps even more importantly, here is contact information for Wes. So Sarah, do we have any questions? No. We don't have any questions so far. Wes, do you have any final thoughts?
No, other than if you're interested in doing business intelligence at your organization, I wish you luck on that. And if you follow some of these tips, I think, focusing on what you need and taking it in baby steps, I think you can be very successful.
And I would put in a plug here for Wes's blog, which I subscribe to. We read it here religiously. We talk about it at our meetings. He's always covering some interesting case studies and really talking about the hard stuff that organizations need to be discussing so that, they can change with the times. Sarah, any questions? Okay, we don't have any questions, so Wes, either they've all fallen asleep or we've answered all their questions. So I want to thank everyone today. I know this is a busy meeting season, but thank you for giving us your time today to talk about this very important topic of business intelligence. So we will send you the slides and the recording within the next day or two, and have a great morning.
Thank you.